pandemic. Just so everyone knows, we've started broadcasting a little early so everyone knows they're in the right place, but we will begin the webinar just at 2 o'clock. So do bear with us for another minute or two. I will repeat this once we begin the webinar officially, but for those who have already joined us, do feel free to take a moment to look at the menu items associated with the participation in the Zoom webinar. There you will see a Q&A function. This is where you can put in questions you'd like to pose to our panelists in the latter part of the webinar. Great, so it is 2 o'clock and we will begin our webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us here at ILC for the 6th installment in our webinar series during this lockdown through the corona pandemic. I'm sure we've all started at least to get used to this new normal, which hopefully will be only temporary for a short while longer. I want to start by thanking you all for joining us to talk today about work in progress, planning the future of work for a post-pandemic world. I want to thank Mercer for their assistance in putting in sponsorship and support for putting this together, as well as other members of the ILC Partners Program. So I want to start first by making sure everyone who's here knows a little bit about us. We are ILC's the UK specialist think tank. We look at the impact of longevity on society and what happens next. We're able to do this work where we really consider the evidence that we can use from research and other work to steer and drive policy solutions. We're strengthened in our ability to do this by the fact that we are an independent group, so we have no formal political affiliations at all. And as you'll see from the members of our panel and from membership in our partners program, strong collaborations with figures across industry helps us to achieve our goals. And our work aims primarily to look at the impact of longevity on society through 3 lenses, or with respect to 3 strategic priorities. The first is to make sure that we move beyond a narrative that aging is something negative, that this is something to which we have to be reactive, but that we start to really think about how best to maximize the benefits of longevity. In doing so, we think that it's important to ensure that longer lives are good for everyone. So this is a bit about recognizing that there is diversity among older people, and that when you talk about people who are, for example, age 65 plus, that's not just one homogeneous group. There are a lot of different dynamics underlying that. Furthermore, by doing so, it strengthens our ability to future-proof policy and practice. We know that older people today are different than older people were 20 years ago, and by that recognition, we can expect that older people in 20 years will be different than they are today. So we need to make sure that our policy can be universal to the extent possible, and also adaptive and flexible as future needs emerge. So again, I want to thank our partners program. You can see those there on your screen, including Mercer, which is with us today. And For those who don't know me, I am Brian Beach. I'm a Senior Research Fellow from ILC. And I have worked on the issue related to employment in later life and the transition to retirement and the changing nature of retirement for well over a decade. And through that, I've met some very informed and wonderful people, some of whom you'll be hearing from later in this webinar. But in this context, we really very much know that there are fundamental shifts that have happened here in these first decades of the 21st century that will have important implications for what the labor market of the future looks like. The nature of work itself, as well as the workplace, have both faced transformational forces, whether that's with respect to the development of technology, or understanding the demographic shift that we are experiencing as part of an aging population, and therefore the importance of making sure we consider older workers when we talk about the labor force. But there are also emerging roles and new relationships happening that shift how we understand this connection between workers and employers. A good example people will know is that of the gig economy. These realities have had to make us think about what we can do in terms of policy and research as we move forward to improve situation both for businesses to maximize their objectives or optimize their goals, but also for individuals and how this changes their relationship with work and other aspects of life, so that work-life balance can be optimized. Now, those are ongoing trends. And as everyone knows, this coronavirus pandemic has sort of come in fairly suddenly. It's shifted things and affected things dramatically. And from our perspective, I think this pandemic has underscored the need for all of our rules and thinking about the future of work to be revisited, potentially reinvented, so that these challenges of the past that we've thought we knew how to address, these new challenges that are emerging through this pandemic, whether they're brand new or whether we're just focused on them for the first time, we have to think about how best to overcome them, because in the end of the day, I think we can all agree we want to do our best to create an equitable, sustainable, and prosperous economy. So on that theme, we're going to be hearing from three experts in this area, all coming from similar but different points of view, to talk about best practice in the sector, talk about best practice across sectors, thinking about different strategies and approaches, different tools that we can use to optimize the future of work as we emerge through the pandemic, but indeed to reshape the place of to reshape the workplace for many years to come. After we hear from the presenters, we'll have a question and answer session. So on a little bit of housekeeping for those participating, you'll see within your Zoom user interface there at the bottom, Q&A button. That's where you can put questions that I will moderate and draw from to stimulate our discussion in the latter half of the webinar. Of course, internet issues do arise. I think, again, many of us are getting used to more of this home-based working and using these kind of telecommunications technologies. So if we do have issues, please bear with us. We are doing our best. And we also invite everyone who wishes to do so to engage in social media. And on Twitter, you can tag the ILC UK handle, and also our event hashtag for the webinar is work in progress. So with little more further ado, I will move on to our first speaker, who is Yvonne Sonsino. Yvonne Sonsino, I know her well, she comes from Mercer. She has extensive experience looking at human resource issues at very senior levels, thinking about elements related to health, wealth, and careers, and has been working on the Mercer's Next Age initiative focused on longevity. So Yvonne, over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the ILC. It's always great to work together with you. I know you're doing such amazing work and research in this area. So I'm privileged today to talk about some of the trends we're seeing around the future of work. But I want to stop first and just quantify a couple of points, because I'll be talking about longevity, I'll be talking about future of work. So how am I defining them in this context? In terms of longevity, it's defined by the data that shows we're living 10 years longer than our parents' generation and 20 years longer than our grandparents' generation. And given this increased life expectancy, one of the things we're seeing is a real struggle to navigate is the fact that we outlive our savings by a considerable margin. Pension systems, saving systems weren't designed with that type of longevity in mind. And the work we've been doing with the World Economic Forum in a great report that was published last year, which is called Investing in and for Our Future, shows that given our increased life expectancy, we're outliving our savings by some 8 to 20 years across the developed nations. And that's worse in the cases for females. We got more over 65s in the population than the under 5s. And the over 55s are the fastest growing workforce segment in many developed nations. Longevity is defined by pension systems that are continually being eroded in value or failing the beneficiary somehow. We're facing later retirement ages, both from the state and in private industry. We're seeing reduced tax concessions, earnings restrictions, tumbling investment returns, and mistrust of the industry. Longevity is defined by failing health and care systems and intergenerational conflict and age bias. And if I turn to the future of work and how I'm defining that in this context today, I'd start by saying it's defined by a system now where we're seeing that our skills have a half-life. It's around 2.5 years at the moment. And future of work is also defined by threats of technology replacing millions, if not billions, of jobs, and by an increasingly growing self-employed population, as Brian mentioned earlier. And that growing self-employed population is unsupported by formal social protection in many cases. I think post-pandemic, it's also now defined by mass unemployment and a deeper recession than we've ever known, and by a switch of emphasis from low-skilled versus skilled work, and from essential workers to non-essential workers. And I think these are really key shifts in the mindset around future of work. It's also defined by a concept of remote first, hence we're all remote today, and a desire by people to change direction. And I spoke to a pilot last week, a boyhood dream to fly planes, and now at 52 he's out of work. However, how he would ever have imagined a pandemic would destroy his career so quickly is beyond belief. To know that such a successful and lucrative and skilled career could be wiped out by a virus is incomprehensible. So this shifting of people's goals and ambitions to reinvent themselves. People are having to reinvent themselves, and more people want to reinvent themselves and take up new jobs. We know certainly that this concept of flexible working, and I gave a broadcast on that earlier today, looking at the different dimensions of flexible working. We're currently focusing very much on one dimension at the moment, and that's where you work. So this concept of working remotely, but we'd add another 4 dimensions to that discussion. So it's when you work, so the time and hours, how that work is delivered, so how you scale up and scale down in times of high demand and low demand, what the work is. future of work? Is the future of work impacting longevity? How has the pandemic added to that? And if we think about longevity impacting the future of work and future of work impacting longevity, I'd say the answer is yes to both questions. The longevity economy shows there's a $9 trillion market for products and services that serve the longevity population. And that will drive new roles, new businesses. It will drive development of the age tech market. And as we've seen from the financial gaps already mentioned urgency, combined with these demographic challenges, labour markets will increasingly age. So the future of work will have to look to accommodate the older worker differently. And I think secondly, rapid digitisation means we'll have to reskill and invest in people's futures. And this applies to everyone, not just older workers. We're all ageing and all of our skills are in need of an upgrade. Economies benefit when people work, so there's a multi-stakeholder imperative to invest in lifelong learning. And so to kick off the discussion later, I just want to look at some of the solutions that play to these immense challenges. I've painted a really gloomy picture there, but I want to end by giving you a glimpse of what the future of work might look like post-pandemic and some of the work that's already happening and being accelerated by where we are now. At a macro level, number one, retaining and hiring post-COVID will probably need to be underpinned with economic stimulus and potentially more social security support, such as universal basic income and universal basic services. And I know, Brian, you published a really good article on this recently, which I shared widely on social media. I think it's a really thought-provoking piece of work. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at that. I think secondly, older populations have found it really hard to secure work in the past. It's going to be even harder in the high unemployment situation that we face now. But their needs have never been greater because of this immediate hit to their pension pots. Many of my colleagues and clients are worried about actually looking and checking their pension balances because they know the markets have tumbled. And for those people close to retirement, that's an immediate impact that they may never recover from. And we've also seen with some of the workplace pension designs that offer matching pension contributions, so the employer matches the employee contribution. We know that in many countries and in many situations, employers have suspended that matching element, similar to what they did in the financial crash, and employees just never recover from that. I think thirdly, we're seeing an intense need to shift supply and demand of labour. I referred to it earlier in the one dimension of flexible working called how we deliver work. So how do you scale up and scale down with market demands? And shifting that supply and demand of labour has been more brought to the fore now, given the pandemic, as retail and hospitality and leisure have suddenly furloughed thousands of workers, and the health and care systems have needed thousands of workers. So we've been working on this temporary talent sharing platform. Actually, we've been working closely with Sarah on this, and Accenture, you'll have seen their People Plus Work platform. And it's how you shift that temporary labour to another employer and the mechanics behind that. So we would never have expected to have seen that type of sharing of labour, particularly amongst competitors before. Although, Alistair, in the past, we've spoken about a consortium, haven't we, in pooling employers in a consortium to share labour between them. So we know that there is much more appetite to do that now, whether on a temporary or more permanent basis. Fourthly, I'd say we're seeing a lot of work happening around deconstructing and reconstructing jobs to adapt to this remote first principle. So how can we make jobs work more easily on a remote basis, and what elements of the job have to be done differently to make the remote working better? And for example, one of the issues we find with flexible working as defined pre-pandemic was flexible working was about working off-site, working at home a day or two a week. One of the big issues we always found with that is that line managers struggled to trust employees while they were off-site. And it's interesting because now they have no choice. You know, thousands of people are working off-site and doing it very well and managing children at home and homeschooling and all sorts of different challenges, and it's working pretty well. But one of the things we know will come to light as we get back to returning to work is that as companies decide to permanently make certain jobs remote, they're creating new types of performance metrics, so measuring on output rather than hours in the office, and that will mean a redesign of performance management systems and grading structures and the ways we reward that type of output and performance. And number 5 on my list here, I think we'll see more onshoring. So there'll be lots of jobs, we believe, certain supply chain jobs brought back onshore, not necessarily just in the UK, actually. We're seeing that already start to happen around the world. And so there are big implications there for the employment position at a macro level. And number 6 on my list, digitisation has accelerated, but will it affect automation? We're running a survey at the moment, a live real-time survey on actions that employers are taking around coronavirus. If you Google Mercer coronavirus survey, I'm sure you'll find it, or I can find you the link. But there are thousands of respondents to this survey, and we ask something like 100 questions of what are you doing, how are you dealing with this, what will you do afterwards? And we've asked this very question, will this affect the automation program in your organisation? But the jury's out on that. Many companies are saying, well, no, actually, that's the last thing we've thought about at the moment. And I'm interested in why that is, because there was so much hype pre-pandemic about automation and job losses to robots. And I wonder what's changed in that. Is there something different around the social contract and the need for work and gainful employment and money? And then finally, number 7 on my list, flexibility is key. And I'd say that we're now seeing a blurring of lines between employment and self-employment, quite rightly so. We're also seeing a blurring of lines between retirement and semi-retirement. And multiple stakeholders will really need to enable this. So it's not just an issue for government. It's not just an issue for employers. It's not just an issue for providers of goods and services. And it's not just an issue for employees or individuals themselves. We all have a stake in getting this right. And some of the new and creative models we're working with in this new blurred, flexible space, developing new employment contracts. I mentioned earlier that there's full-time worker on the one side with permanent status and stability and security of that status. And at the other end, there's the gig worker. And we've seen many companies, that's one of the first things they've cut, is their gig worker and contractor population to save costs. So they're really the two extremes of the employment spectrum. And we don't necessarily have enough social protections in place for those self-employed. So this central place, this what we're calling contractor plus, somewhere in between those two extremes, is a model we've been developing with a number of clients and is already out there in action. And it gives them some job security, some training, some employee benefits, and those aren't necessarily parts and parcel of the normal contract of work. So I'll stop there and pass on to the next speaker and wait to take some questions in a short while. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. I mean, as always, very stimulating, and I'm sure you would be unsurprised that I have lots of questions and many things I'd love to hear more about. So I'm sure we'll expand on this a bit further as we move into the questions and answers later. But now I'd like to turn to Sarah Heyworth, who is CEO of Local Treasures. And this is a platform that uses advanced artificial intelligence to match experienced workers with a wide variety of flexible work opportunities. So relates obviously to a number of those themes that Yvonne mentioned just there at the end. So Sarah, please, over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk today. I was thinking of what insights and usefulness I can bring to this panel, and I think probably the best part that I can bring is I can actively bring some on-the-ground insights for a business that is working and providing work for people in later life, and that's really what Local Treasures deliberately set out to do when we started up about 5-6 years ago. We match people with experience and skills with all sorts of jobs. When we started, we concentrated mainly on home chores. So we would have a customer who wanted some gardening doing, and we would match them with someone who had really great gardening skills, an experienced gardener. We actively targeted as our supplier base. We call them treasures, the people that do all the hard work, as over 50s, because we were champions of people with experience, and we still are. And over time, we've now got over 3,000 treasures, so suppliers on our books, and we operate in and around the majority of the south of the UK. And but the thing that unifies all of the treasures on our books is that they need to keep earning. They are mainly all retired or in some form of semi-employment, but they need to keep earning money to pay the bills at the end of the month. And that, although they come from a wide variety of backgrounds, that's the unifier. They say things like they love Local Treasures because it brings them great relief to know that they can pay the bills. So I'm going to talk about 4 areas today that, as we've been developing Local Treasures, are really important in terms of the reason that people want to keep working, and the way businesses can develop situations and opportunities to encourage people to keep working for as long as they possibly can. So the first one is about skills. And the whole raft of skills that people have. And as I said, Local Treasures was started using a lot of gardeners, housekeepers, companions, DIYers, decorators, you name it. In terms of home chores, we recruited an awful lot of people who were great at that. And we had, I suppose, 2 types of treasure. There was the one type of treasure who had been working for 30 years in an office and now just wanted to get out in the fresh air and spend the next 15 years working in other people's gardens and using their hobby to earn money, which is just great. And then increasingly, as we became more well known or better established, we found that there was another type of worker who weren't quite ready to hang up their uniforms just yet, or to hang up their business suits. And so we have accountants, ex-accountants on our books who became bookkeepers, ex-teachers who became tutors, ex-nurses who became companions, and so on and so forth. So we started to use and utilise the whole raft of skills that people have. And a really good example I often talk about is a chap called Jeff who lives in Cornwall, and he's a treasure, and we used to use him just as a gardener, which is great, and he did lots of gardening work for us, but he has also spent 30 years as a copywriter and a graphic designer, and he also happened to help his friend set up his business as well. And I'm really delighted to announce that he has just done his first copywriting job, and it's really important that for us, so, because not only was have we been able to utilize all his skills, but particularly at a time under the current situation where he hasn't been able to get out and do as much gardening as he wanted, we've been able to utilize other skills that he has to keep him earning, which is really important. And just in a normal year, you could see how his gardening skills would be in less demand in November, December, January kind of time. So being able to use a raft of his skills is really important, and particularly in situations like the current situation we're in. we work a lot with Southampton University, and they did a big survey with all of our treasurers to see if we should, if they were interested in us using and changing our technology to be able to offer the full range of skills that they have. And overwhelmingly, our treasurers said, yeah, they were really keen to utilise both their professional skills and also their hobbies and their life skills that they have. So so I think the learning that is really important for businesses is to be able to find ways that that people, as they get older, can use a whole range of their skills, and give that kind of blended work opportunity to people. So if they've spent their whole time being a surveyor, actually, absolutely use those professional skills, but also what else have they got up their sleeve that they'd also be using, or might want to retrain to learn, to give them better resilience as they reach traditional retirement age. So the next area I want to talk about, and Yvonne has already touched on this, is about flexibility, and the fact that we offer flexible and independent ways to work is by far and away the biggest reason that our treasurers come to local treasures and continue to stay with local treasures, because there's such a huge pressure on this kind of sandwich generation. So people who are still working and have older parents, so they might be in their 50s or in their 60s, but they've got older parents who really need a lot of help now, or they've got grandchildren who there's some pressure on them to look after, especially during school holidays, or they might have their own health issues that they need to look after. And to be able to have a flexible approach to work is really important to them. And what we often find is that the reason a lot of them will have given up work is because actually the work that they were currently in was too inflexible for them to be able to manage all those other pressures on their lives. And a good example, and I'm going to try and pepper what I talk about with real examples, is a treasurer called Sarah, who used to be a finance director at IBM. She had health issues in her early 50s, and she wasn't able to manage the full-time work that she had to do. So she now works a couple of days a week with local treasurers as doing bookkeeping for local businesses. She works 1 day a week as a PA for a local artist, and she also, so all those through local treasures. And then independently, she works 1 day on the market, helping in the fruit and vegetable, because she really likes to be active in the local community. And so so she manages her own time with those clients. She found them through local treasures, but it's totally up to her to work the days that she needs to work, and to manage her relationship with those customers. And I think that's really important. So real flexibility to allow people to manage how they work, and those other constraints on their lives is really important for a future of work model. The next area I want to talk about is about tech. And so when I first started Local Treasures about 6 years ago, the very first treasurer that I was having coffee with, he didn't even have a mobile phone. So I was thinking, oh, blimey, how's this going to work? And but really interestingly, and particularly in the last couple of years, is the spread of technology with, I suppose, an age group of people who are not digital natives. So they weren't born in the late 80s, they were born pre-late 80s, but are adopting technology. And actually, it's really the acceleration of the smartphone or the tablet with this group. And recognizing that, Local Treasures, we had a big tech change a couple of years ago. We moved from being a very manual business, a matching business, to a fully automated one, using a lot of tech and creating a matching platform. But that was really led by our treasurers. And the very first lesson that we had from that was to collaborate with our user base and our supplier base on the tech that we designed. So we designed some really beautiful tech, and our customers loved it, but not one treasurer wanted to use it. It was far too complicated and complex. And we learned that, it was a real lesson for us. And now all the tech that we design collaboratively with our treasurers, because they do all the hard work, they do all the jobs. And so it's most important that they find it really easy to use. So when we launched our app, last year, it had been designed and trialled and tested with our treasures. And in fact, one of the most regular parts of feedback was that the font was too small, because our 28-year-old tech developer doesn't need reading glasses, but all our treasures need reading glasses, and we want them to accept jobs and make this app really user-friendly. And that's a big issue with technology, that it is often designed and developed by young people. And if it's going to be used for an older audience, it needs to be collaboratively built. And I had a great conversation the other day with one of our treasures, just with a coronavirus kind of lens on it. The adoption of video conferencing, throughout all age groups has been amazing. Something that certainly an older age group will not have come intuitively to. Now, and a treasure said to me the other day, he was booked in to go and look at some outdoor DIY work that he was asked to do, and he didn't really fancy driving 7 miles there and back to find out that he couldn't do the job. And he just said to me, well, can I not Zoom the customer? And he was asking me this, and it's a great moment. And so we're now looking to integrate some digital some video technology into our app, which means the customers and the treasures can just and that kind of adoption that has come out of this pandemic is a positive thing, and certainly the use of technology is a positive thing from our point of view. And the final point that I wanted to talk about was finance. And Yvonne has touched on it quite a lot, actually. All our treasures are self-employed, and they want to be self-employed because it allows them to have the flexibility to be able to pick and choose jobs, to say yes or no to any jobs. I can't send them to any jobs. They say yes or no to the ones that they choose, and can work 3 days this week and 2 days next week and 1 day the following week. It's entirely up to them. But coronavirus has laid bare the inadequate protection for self-employed workers, which is, really close to my heart, because, and I've mentioned a few times, our treasures, we wouldn't have a business if it wasn't for our treasures doing all the work. So, but we have one bright note in that kind of situation, and that's something that we developed late last year through watching our treasures. And I used to pay our treasures manually at the end of every month, and we changed to a wallet system because we thought it was only fair that if you had done a job on the 1st of October, you didn't have to wait to the 31st of October to get paid for that. So it was part of our automation and part of our app. We created a wallet. So where I would have paid John Smith, the treasurer, £1,000 for the £1,000 work that he had done for the month of October, John Smith is credited with the £1,000, but really interestingly, he chooses to only take £750 out. And so he leaves a quarter on average of his payment in the local treasurer's wallet. There's no incentive, there's no interest rate, there's nothing like that. And we found that a lot of our treasurers were doing this. And so the following month, there was an extra amount that topped up and so on, particularly over Christmas, where we would have expected most of it to come out as people spend more, particularly over the long month of January, where people need more money to top up what they've got. And it's really interesting. So we asked them, we just did a quick survey, and overwhelmingly our treasurers said along the lines of, it's for a rainy day. I need a pot of money, and I like pots of money, and I like this one here for a rainy day fund. So there can't be a bigger reason to use your rainy day fund than during the coronavirus situation currently. And I think what I really mean by this is, so we've started communicating with our treasurers in terms of an earn and save. And I think the real opportunity for organisations and businesses is to find ways for their employees to actively be financially resilient. And so local treasures take on that is, the more that you earn, the more that you can save. And we've got the function where you can save, and we're obviously doing different things with that now. But I think it's about building ways and opportunities for people to take an active part in being financially resilient, rather than just a passive part in it, which has been kind of the traditional approach to pensions, which is really, really important. So then my point, so it's about skills and how we can use a whole raft of them to encourage people to work in later life. Flexibility is obviously really important, and how we can create the most flexible ways to allow people to manage their own situations and work to fit in that. Technology, and how we can, how it's really important to collaborate on the technology to make sure that it's useful and helpful for people as they get older and to continue to work. And finally, to create products and opportunities for people to be financially resilient and to take an active role in that. And we've taken these insights and strategies, and we're working with Yvonne and Mercer to adapt these strategies to kind of more formal business situations. So currently Local Treasures provides options for people once they have left work. And wouldn't it be great to use some of these strategies to create a range of options for people whilst they are in work, to allow businesses to retain their talent and experience, however that needs to be done and however that can be done flexibly, whilst encouraging people to see the opportunity of having longer, flexible working lives. So that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sarah. It's fascinating to hear about some of the stuff you've done as a real example of some of the things I know I and others have called for over the years, of some of this innovation in approach to providing things like you mean about flexibility and adapting to the range of skills that are available. So I'm sure we'll get back to it, because I see that there are plenty of questions coming in. So all of our participants out there, please add to them. But before we move on to that, last but certainly not least, is a friend of ILC's, Alistair McQueen, who's head of savings and retirement at Aviva. Alistair does some of the communications work for issues around public personal finances, savings and retirement, and we've worked with him and Aviva around some of the work they've done around a midlife MOT, which I don't know if you're going to talk about, Alistair, but I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Yvonne. I was listening to Sarah there referencing technology. I had never heard of Zoom 2 months ago. I don't know if I'm the only one that never heard of Zoom, but now in terms of technology and longevity, we've got grandparents and grandchildren speaking on Zoom all the time. So quite incredible what technology has done. And thanks to the ILC. I love the ILC. Longevity was a word that I hadn't really heard of a few years ago, and now it's mainstream and more people are talking about longevity. And I would say ILC is probably the preeminent organization that brings together business, academia, government, the health sector, etc., in one place on this critical subject. So thank you for them for doing everything they're doing over these 6 talks. I'm going to talk about 3 things from Aviva's perspective. Why does Aviva believe in the importance of considering the future of work? Secondly, what has Aviva done? Where have we put our money where our mouth is? And thirdly, I will touch on the coronavirus situation and what this may mean for the future of work through the eyes of Aviva, at least. That's what I'll touch on. The first thing, so why does Aviva believe in the importance of the future of work? Well, I'm just going to quote what virtually every report and accounts will tell you from their chairman's statement, is that we in Aviva do believe that our people are our most important asset. Everybody says that. But I think Aviva increasingly is trying to believe this and make it true. Aviva has a need to make it true. We have 30,000 people who work for Aviva around the world. We do not manufacture tangible products that people receive through their Amazon delivery box. We sell promises. We will promise to pay your insurance should you bash your car. We will promise to provide you with an income retirement. We will promise to provide you with healthcare should you need it, etc. And promises are built on human beings. And if we don't have good people, we can't deliver these good promises, and upon that, our business would fail. So people are at the heart of our organization, and therefore the future of work is critical to our business. It's also critical to our customers, clearly. The backbone of Aviva's business in the United Kingdom is helping people save for their retirement. And there are 2 levers that most people can pull to prepare for later life. One is saving, the other one is working. Aviva has a lot to say about saving, but recently we felt we were light on what we could say about working, and we wanted to get more engaged in that subject in this debate as well, not just about saving, but also about working to help people have the retirement that they seek. I would be honest to say it's not always been like this inside Aviva. In the years leading up to the financial crisis, 2008, the mantra inside my organization, and I would say many large organizations, was that of shareholder value, driving beliefs in cost and efficiency to drive up the share price. And we learned from that experience, and we learned that that mantra fails. It did not achieve the objectives we were trying for it to achieve. It drove the wrong behaviors into our organization. It delivered poor customer service. Our mantra is now shifted from one of shareholder value to one of customer value, investing for our customers, investing for our people, so that in the long term, delivering ultimately the best for our shareholders too. And we are reaping the rewards of that. So our mantra is delivered by a virtuous circle, that if we get the right solution for our people, they can deliver the right solution for our customers, which will ultimately then, thirdly, deliver the right solution for our shareholders, and we work in that cycle. I would also put on the record it's critical that this belief is led from the top. Without senior management believing in this, driving this, and living this in their daily behavior, it's very difficult for this philosophy to stick, and therefore the critical role that senior leaders have in this agenda of putting people and customers maybe before shareholders in that order, it's very difficult to achieve it. So Aviva does try to believe that our people are our most important asset. Easy for me to say. So my second section is therefore, so what have we done? How have we put our money where our mouth is? And I've listed down here 6 things. There's many that I could have chosen, but 6 ways in which we have put our money where our mouth is. Yvonne mentioned reward, and that's the first on my list, reward. Like it or not, reward is a massive driver for why people come to work and what people do when they're in the work. We have had a bonus scheme inside Aviva. For all of our 30,000 employees are eligible for bonuses. And historically, it was a bonus scheme driven around sales. Are our sales achieving what we need them to do? And that was driving a cost-focused and efficiency-focused and non-people-centered focused behavior. The backbone of our bonus system now is driven around service. And that is changing the way in which we see the importance of our people in the organization and the importance of the working environment for our people. So reward and revising it to meet our people's needs has been critical. The other 5, I'll say we've invested in flexible working. Yes, we have many people working from home. We have people on short-term contracts. We have people on annual contracts to work a set number of hours with Aviva over the year, and we will take them off the bench as and when we need them. And we've reaped the rewards of that. In the UK, 6 weeks ago, 17,000 people we had working in offices. Now we've got 17,000 people working from home and working relatively successfully from home. The culture was already there that accommodated flexible working, as Yvonne said, without that suspicious boss looking over the shoulder of 17,000 people. The second area is we have invested in carers in the organisation, the sandwich generation that was previously referred to. We had a very strong carers policy for parents who are looking after younger members of their family, but we had completely avoided and forgotten parents who are looking after increasing numbers of older members of their family. So we now give the same rights to leave to parents of young children as we do to people looking after elderly relatives as well, to make sure we recognise the 360 degrees of caring responsibilities that people can take. The third one is investing in training and development, apprenticeships. Aviva, given the scale of the organisation, does have to comply with the apprenticeship levy. We've got approaching 500 apprentices in the organisation now. And apprentices typically are associated with the 20, 21, 22-year-olds. We celebrate the fact that we've got 65-year-old apprentices in the organisation, people who you would think would be winding down or retiring or beginning whole new schemes of learning, and we celebrate them within the organisation. We shout about them from the rooftops to challenge any perception that age is a barrier to opportunity. In terms of gender, the 5th one on my list here is shared parental leave. We recognise that parental leave had a significant impact on the careers predominantly of women. It was predominantly the women who would step back and take that role of childcare. Aviva had a desire to look at and support the closure of the gender pay gap. So Aviva now gives equal parental leave to both mother and father of that child. The situation is, if a woman has a child, the father, if he works for Aviva, he is equally entitled to the same amount of leave that his wife or partner should have, etc. To try and challenge that perception that it's the man's role to keep on working and maybe the woman's role to look after the child, and just provide that mental check in the organisation. And the final one, as Brian mentioned, is midlife MOTs. We recognise that the fastest growing demographic in our organisation were the over 45s, representing 1 in 3 of our working population. A huge amount of experience, collectively 100,000 years of corporate memory in that population, but they were leaving the organisation at a faster rate than younger demographics. They had a cultural perception that career development ended at 50. We are failing that massive asset in the organisation. And so we now provide this demographic with an annual midlife, as we call it, MOT, where we allow this population to reflect and consider and plan their wealth, their work, and their well-being, culturally trying to challenge the perception that age is a barrier to opportunity. What have been the results of this? Well, for the individuals, all these programs that we've put in place, there's metrics showing that their level of confidence is up, their level of awareness of where to seek help is up, and their engagement in the organisation is up, which is all great. And therefore, the HR director is nodding. But is the finance director nodding? Well, we believe the finance director is nodding. Last year, Aviva had record operating profits, despite our massive investment in our people. Retention is up, absenteeism is down, and participation in training within the organisation is up. So we're seeing a bottom line return in this people-based investment. And the finance director is nodding. And finally, let's just turn to the situation of coronavirus. It brings big challenge to this debate. And this is one that I think I am certainly in the middle of, and that's why I'm keen to hear the views of others. We always think the sweet spot of any business initiative is to hit something that hits positively with 4 key audiences. That's the customer or the employee, government, media, and the shareholder. Prior to coronavirus, we felt that investing in people in our aging workforce hit positively those 4. The employee benefited, the government liked it, media liked it, and the shareholders liked it because we were winning a war for talent. That was all good. Of the 4 metrics, the one that's coming under strain now is the shareholder one. How can we build a strong business case to tell the finance director that now is the time to double down on investing in your people when there's a massive economic uncertainty out there? We expect rising unemployment. We've got 800,000 businesses in the UK using the furlough scheme today. Aviva believes that the importance of investing in its people is stronger than ever. But it's going to call upon leadership, it's going to call upon faith, and it's going to call upon us on this call who maybe believe it to really have the strongest possible business case to convince those who are understandably got their eyes elsewhere. But there are finally some opportunities. 5 opportunities. Flexible working has been transformed as a result of coronavirus. We're learning every day so much more. Technology and our use of it has been transformed, and how can we use that within the workplace? Carers, the importance of carers that we see every night on the news has been transformed. We must, as businesses, reflect that. Well-being, I think there's been many people saying that people now associate wealth and health in the same phrase, and businesses can play their part in bringing wealth and health together. And finally, that of corporate responsibility. I think many individuals, many employees, many customers will look back on the coronavirus pandemic and say which businesses did play their part, and equally which businesses did not play their part. And I challenge the forward-thinking businesses to say we want to be on the right side of that divide. So massive challenges, but big opportunities for those who are brave enough and have the faith to believe it's the right thing to do. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Alistair. Lots of key issues you've raised. Lots of parallels to some of the themes that Yvonne and Sarah both highlighted. I think that there are some, having done my own bit of work around what you at Aviva have done with respect to your midlife MOT delivery, I can't, commend it more as a wonderful example of business taking the interest, as you rightly point out, this need for business to make sure that they're when they consider investments, that the employee, their own employees are part of that consideration just as much as they may have a tendency to think about investment in other areas. We've got a number of questions up here. I'm going to go ahead and ask Yvonne and Sarah to unmute yourselves. And we're going to start with a discussion here around some of the themes. I've got a lot of thoughts, particularly around this question of the importance of social protection and how businesses, from my point of view, I think it's informed well by the comments all three of you've made. We can only expect employers to do so much. We can't ask them to deliver, gold and et cetera to all of their employees. Their roles are limited. And when we talk about social protection, given my research background around comparative social policy, social protection to me, suggests the role of the state. So I want to throw that out there first for you just to so that it's in the back of your head, because it's a very challenging question, I think, about what is the role of social protection as we move forward. I do note, Yvonne, you talk about the need for, when we think about what's going to happen after the coronavirus pandemic, the importance of retaining, the importance of rehiring, they may need to be underpinned by social protection initiatives. And thank you for the plug on the Universal Basic Income and Services blog. And without trying to be a person or an organization that says this is the solution, it is important, I think, for everyone to understand the debate around the potential for things like universal basic income and universal basic services to provide a bit more support. So I'm going to park that, though, so that it can marinate a bit in the back of your heads, because we've got a specific question here from the participants, our audience, to ask about any concepts or models that support phased retirement options. From my perspective, it sounds like the kind of delivery that Local Treasures gives has built in its very nature, the potential for phased retirement. But on Alistair, are either of you aware of any good initiatives that deliver structured phased retirement?
If I might jump in there first, actually, because we're currently researching this, because towards the end of last year, a client in the US said to us, can you do us a benchmarking study on what good practice looks like for phased retirement for executives in the chemical sector? And we said, we'd love to. And then we searched around for data, and there was virtually nothing on phased retirement, let alone for executives in the chemical sector. There's very little research done in the last 10 years on this. So the work we've been doing with the World Economic Forum this year is actually exploring the redesign of retirement programs. And we're in the middle of a series of regional workshops with them now, addressing this problem with experts around the world and structuring what might a new phased retirement program look like, structuring human-centered design thinking workshops to try and craft that. And we've been doing polls during that session, and then building these evidence bases coming out of that. And I think it goes back to my point earlier about the blurring of lines between retirement and semi-retirement will happen. And it's got to, a phased retirement program at the moment, that there are some informal arrangements going on around the world where certain people get to go early and maybe they hand on some of their skills before they go. But we believe that we need to structure something that enables a good succession plan, a true agreement between both parties of how you transition from full-time work into full-time retirement. That does include the transmission of knowledge and the training of future generations. And we need to also look at how that impacts your deliverables, the actual job content, and your reward and benefits program as well, and structure that. And coupled with moves into the areas that Sarah's business is working on, is how do people find new ways of engagement, new ways to motivate themselves, new ways to keep themselves busy in that new environment. So lots more work to be done on that, Brian, but we're on it.
Yeah. Yeah, Alistair, please.
Sure. One of the phrases that we use inside Aviva is that a strong organization, if I get this right, is as strong as its weakest line manager. And the point we're trying to make there is that, well, somebody can sit at board level and have these theoretical debates about the need for phased retirement. If the line manager who has to deliver it is not confident in making it happen, it will not happen. And most of us will receive our education how to deliver and manage businesses from our former managers and the managers that went before them, who have probably not had much experience in delivering phased retirement. And so it's a little bit unfair to suddenly expect these line managers to suddenly become experts in an alien concept that is phased retirement. So a lot of the work that we will do in Aviva is empowering and educating the line manager as to what does this concept of phased retirement mean. It's not just moving from 5 days a week to 4 days a week, as people have been suggesting. It's job sharing, it's home-based working, it's part-time hours, it's annual contracts. Aviva's created something we call the alumni, so that when you do leave Aviva, you don't lose your contact completely and we can call you back off the bench. But it must not just be a policy that leaves itself and sits in the boardroom table. Aviva has got, 5,000 line managers that we're calling upon to deliver these new initiatives. And if we don't educate them and help them, then these ideas will never fly. So let's not forget the line manager in all this.
That's an important point. And it starts to make me think about, on the one hand, of course, I think that's a crucial point. You got to have the right kind of direction and steer, and because there is going to be a embedded relationship between the person and whoever is managing them. So for a phased approach to function, that relationship will need to be strong. I wonder, I've worked in the past with some academics, Sarah Vickerstaff, Wendy Loretto, David Lane. They've worked on a project looking at aspects of work in later life, including the extent to which flexibility in retirement exists. And David's work, really sort of identified that the prevalence of this kind of phased retirement approach is very, very low in the US and the UK. Despite how it's been sort of promoted as at least part of the solution. In some of these debates, there are concerns around the financial component to this. So, are people who are at a very senior level, for example, who want to, who are shifting into this retirement phase of their life in a phased way, able to manage that sort of financial the cutting back on the finance. Alistair, in some of the work, for example, potentially with the midlife MOT, has this, to what extent has this been a driver for people's reluctance to take up phased retirement approaches?
So if I follow your question, I think one of the challenges we'll always put to our senior executives when we're debating these things is to remind them that they are not the customer. We're not building products and customer and employee services for your 6-figure plus executives that sit at the top of the tree. They're big enough to look after themselves. And if they think that their needs are the same as everybody else's needs, we have to politely remind them that that is not the case. So we listen to the views of our executives, but more importantly, we listen to the people who are going to take the benefit that is designed for them. So I would approach with caution this is off the record, listening too closely to your senior executives in some of this work.
Off the record, recorded on Zoom, broadcast to people.
I mean, I think it's a fair point. I may have steered it slightly different. I suppose it's my question is more, it's getting back to this sort of some of the things that Sarah has highlighted that Local Treasures does, where their treasures are doing this on the one hand because it's fulfilling, but also there is financial need that they have. And so, so I suppose my question is really trying to understand the extent to which, as Alistair, as you say, you've got to have this management structure in place. Those are part of the structural elements to sort of allowing these new approaches to retirement. And how does that sit against the financial need? But I don't want to steer us too much into talking a lot about retirement, because we're actually supposed to be talking about work and how do we get people to work more into later life. We've got one amongst our questions.
Could I just add one point to that, Brian? Is that in my experience, and a lot of our situation with our treasures is they have had retirement or redundancy thrust upon them, and but they actively choose and want to have a gradual retirement, and that's what they do through Local Treasures. So there is a will with the workforce that they and that quite engages them to be able to use a variety of skills and to be able to manage the way that they manage their own retirement. But it's because the situation has been thrust upon them rather than actually working through it with the organisation, which would be a much more preferable situation to have.
And I think that's a fantastic point with respect to the debates around retirement, because retirement is so often positioned as a decision and a choice that people make. But as someone who's researched this, it's primarily not really driven by personal agency, it's driven by personal circumstances.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, I just on the when I speak to the media on the subject of phased retirement, quite quickly they'll then jump to, oh, you're asking people to work until they drop. And that's very much not the mantra that we have inside Aviva. We're not talking about people in their late 60s and their 70s and their 80s. We're talking about people in their 50s and early 60s to allow them and enable them to continue contributing. We'll turn later to the 65s and the 70s and the 75s. It's the people in their 50s that we really want to support and value and get their skills retained in the business. So there's always a danger that this conversation about phased retirement channels into asking people to work until they drop. And I'm always keen to just push back on that argument.
And that
Absolutely.
said, we have, we have treasures who are in their 90s who choose to work, not often, but a few hours here and there, because they like the money, but also they like keeping active. And then it becomes a different reason to keep working, and it becomes a social isolation reason and that kind of thing, and a community aspect. But so it's, from my point of view, once they have retired, there, as I said, there is a kind of a will to just keep your hand in. I like your phrase, Alistair, of your Aviva's alumni. I liked your phrase of calling people back off the bench.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, and that organisations can retain their talent and that experience. And you talked as well about the memory, a cultural memory that so many people have. And I really like that too. And to be able to find ways for organisations to retain that expertise, doesn't have to be full-time, is really important.
And I just thank you, but on that point, this is not being motivated by some charitable altruism on Aviva's part. The anecdote that I share at this point is Aviva, like all big companies, many IT systems. We had an IT system in our Norwich location. There was only 3 people left in the organization that knew how it worked, and they were all approaching retirement. And we had to make sure we could retain those skills for the well-being of thousands of customers. And so having them on the bench was a really corporately and commercially valuable thing for us as a business, not just about us being charitable and being nice.
Yeah, very much.
And I think in some of the new models we're seeing, that whole alumni concept particularly if you think about pooling as a consortium of employers. It's a really cheap way of keeping highly skilled, credentialed labour. You know, if they work for an Aviva, if they work for a Mercer, they've achieved a certain level of test already. You know, they've been there, they've done that, they've been credential checked. And so having access to pools of labour like that, literally without the recruitment fees, makes an awful lot of commercial sense.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back to you, Yvonne, on the point when you were talking about sort of what the future of work will involve, the different dimensions, and you highlighted very wisely, I think, that it's more than just about, you know, where we work. The flexibility has to go to all of our other sort of question words, and with respect to the when we work. I wonder if you've got any information or thoughts on the role that the extent to which work has the capacity to, or whether there's a need for work to be better at accommodating longer career breaks. I think this makes me think also, Alistair, about, you know, the fact that you're providing equal paternal leave for both men and women, which I think is a wonderful initiative to address some of the stereotyped gender roles. But, you know, these questions about people's temporary exit from work and their ability to, you know, smoothly re-enter. Perhaps COVID-19 will give us insights in this, but this comes from our audience about questioning, you know, the impact and the stigma related to long career breaks and what can be done to overcome it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And one of the companies we're working with is already looking at how they almost co-invest with the employee on these longer term sabbaticals. And for lots of reasons, it could be the need to take a period off to care, for example, for someone. It might be to fulfill that dream of training for the marathon and going to do it in some far-flung country. Or it might be, and this is becoming more and more relevant, it might be to retrain or reinvent yourself. And so I think companies are already experimenting with these models with some success. We've got to wait and see. A lot of this work is experimental at the moment. So we don't have a track record yet to prove from, but there's lots of these experiments going on, and we can start to then assess the impact of those on turnover rates, levels of engagement, recruitment costs, retention rates, etc. So I think that's a really, really important one. And as we move towards accommodating the 100-year life, they are going to become more and more common, more and more frequent. What I would say is there is a joint responsibility for those people who do take those career breaks to remain relevant. You know, it's not just about coming back to the table with the skills that you had 5 years ago. It's about working out, well, what is relevant now? How are my current skills, my complete spectrum of transferable skills, how are they relevant to these opportunities that present themselves? And Sarah, in your model, because your treasures are going in originally to do gardening, actually they've been a copywriter and a graphics designer. It's interesting that they've been able to make that shift to gardener instantly. You know, in fact, I've used a gardener from your services, and he was an armed policeman in his previous life, but he was also a Britain in Bloom judge for 5 years. So he has used his transferable skills and gardening knowledge from Britain in Bloom to reinvent himself in later life. Mm-hmm. And yet similarly, they can call on their previous skills. So I do think we as individuals have a part to play in that.
And I think on that career gap point, again, I'll just come back to the line manager without repeating myself. we've all got bias in how we think about these things, and I think there's been an established bias in the mindsets of many of us that our career should start at 20 and our career ends at 65, and we rise up the hierarchy in the organization, and anyone who's taken 2 years out, that's a black mark in their career potentially. We've been challenging our people, line managers, to challenge those biases that they may carry, we may all carry, because we believe that they're detrimental to the future of the organization. We're missing great talent by carrying these bias in our mind. And so we try to challenge that. On the other side of that same debate, however, we have to be honest and manage expectations. We cannot say to everybody, you can have 2 years out. And quite often the line that will be in our policies as an employer is subject to operational requirements, which again throws it right back down into the lap of the line manager. Have you got the operational capacity to give this career break to that individual? And so I guess I'm repeating myself, the need to support the individuals who deliver these philosophies need to be encouraged, supported, educated, and given the confidence to bring them to life, challenging a way that we have never really thought of before, but setting us up for the future.
And Sarah, you highlighted that many of the importance of flexibility with the local treasurers, and how a lot of people came to you because of inflexibility in their previous work. And I wonder, do you to what extent you think if if being able to take breaks from work and being better facilitated to take these kinds of breaks would help people or reduce their need to move away from an employer, or to what extent the sort of model you've generated and created, particularly in linking with local economies, can actually provide a bridge, let's say, between people who need breaks and flexibility to existing employers.
Yeah, very much so. I think that's certainly where we started out, was that people found that they were stuck in really inflexible situations, and they struggled to be able to deal with other parts of their work. However, we are now looking at ways, and we're working with Mercer to try and integrate what we know from local treasures to see if we can encourage people to stay in work for longer, in their traditional workplaces for longer. And it's the midlife MOT, it's, as Alistair was talking about, and I know Yvonne's been working with, if we can find out, and again it goes back to the line manager, doesn't it? If we can find out the stresses and strains on an employee that might make them leave because they cannot cope with their current situation, then that's really important. So, I would say if someone is struggling to, because their elderly parents who live miles away need a lot of help, and the only person that can help them is that employee, and is affecting their work because they're anxious and stressed about it. Actually, an organisation like Local Treasures could step in. My mum lives miles away in Somerset, could step in and look after my mum when she needs a bit of help, and create that kind of concierge service to alleviate that problem, which you can find out in a midlife MOT, which will then enable the employee to be more productive at work, or be more think more positively about their current work situation, and stay for longer. So I think it comes down to talking, doesn't it? It comes down to acknowledging that there are lots of facets and lots of barriers in the way to encouraging people to work for longer. But if we have the conversations early enough during their working lives, then we can put opportunities and situations in place to alleviate some of those barriers.
Great. I'm sort of drawing on from some of the comments or some of the questions that the audience has asked. We've got one comment related to the discussion I suppose we had on phased retirement, but highlighting that it's not just about finances, it's about purposeful work as well. And I know that it's back in when the Department of Work and Pensions was working on their Fuller Working Lives program, which they previously were calling Extending Working Lives. I made a very strong point and was successful in communicating to them the importance of emphasizing that you can't communicate that work is good for people's health, because the evidence doesn't exist on that. But what we do know is that good work is good for people's health, just as leaving bad work is actually good for people's health. This links to another topic that's been highlighted in the comments with respect to research in Australia. But it makes me start to think about the element of sector differences, because we know that sector differences play a big role in many different outcomes. We've seen how occupational differences have manifested in some of the mortality outcomes related to COVID-19. There's a lot more research to be done on what that link is, why it's there. I also think that that we've moved from an economic, emphasized economic perspective before the pandemic around skilled and unskilled work, into recognizing, because of the pandemic, that certain roles, not only are they skilled and should never have been called unskilled, but that they are key and essential. And that dialogue, I think the sort of meaning that underpins that is quite important and something we should carry forward. I wanted to ask, though, when we talk about some of the flexibility, we talk about some of the shifts that we recognize within the workplace around digitalization, the extent to which flexibility is possible. What are, for all of the panelists, any of your thoughts? We'll start with Yvonne. To what extent, can this be developed as a universal, or will we have to recognize that this is only available for certain sectors and for certain occupational categories?
It's again another good point. When we started researching flexible work and which jobs could be flexed, we set ourselves a real challenge of how do we systematically analyse a job for flexibility quotient. That's what we've been calling it, the flexibility quotient of an organisation or a job. And we decided that actually, after we'd done a lot of research with a lot of companies on this, hands-on, on the ground, on factory floors, in offices, globally, all over, all roles can flex. On one dimension or another, all roles can flex. We decided possibly that with this one maybe exception, the leading man or lady on the opening night in a Broadway show, he or she has got to be there at that time. So there's no remote, no timing changes. He's got to deliver that play. He's got to do it whether he's got a full audience or no audience, and we can't automate it. So that was possibly the only role on the planet that is not possible to flex on one or another dimension. So apologies to the arts profession out there. But everything else can be. And I think one sector, touching on some of the points you've raised, Brian, for me that stands out is the care profession. It's been historically low skilled, low paid, undernourished, totally under-resourced, and there's a lot of work needs doing there. And we'll see good change coming out of that, I expect. But if you think about care jobs, very, very low pay. My daughter's a social worker, so she's in this category, and the potential as well for pay to rise. In some jobs, it's a nice exponential curve. In care, you plateau at about age 30, and then you're at that level right through until you 60, 70, and you leave the profession. So there's a huge amount that should and could be done there on pay, and to bring that level of essential work up to a sensible place. And then we'll probably see a shift in dynamics for the talent, the war for talent as well. One company I was talking to recently who has care homes was saying that when the NHS gets better funding, they see all their care staff migrating to the NHS because the pay and the conditions will improve. And so that's got to start to bring a realistic pay review up the scale, up the spectrum for people who want to survive in the care sector, and many do and will want to. So there's a huge amount to be done in this area. Some sectors will fare much better than others, and some much worse. But that's one where I think we'll see a really fundamental shift in the way work is organised, the way work is rewarded, the way work is the narrative around the type of work that's done there.
Yeah, and just build it. Can I just pick on the sector point, like everyone was saying? I'm assuming that for the four of us, we're working at home more than we did last year, a lot more than we did last year, but we've all got experience of working from home. I'm assuming the four of us have that. The Office for National Statistics put out figures 2 weeks ago. Most workers in the United Kingdom have got no experience of working from home. The only one sector where a majority have some experience from working from home is the IT sector. So this concept of flexible working and working from home is alien to more than 15 million workers in the United Kingdom. The second point I would make is we've got a job to do in lobbying and advocating and getting our messages more powerfully across. And why do I say that? Ipsos Mori do their monthly issues index, what's keeping people awake at night. In 2011, aging was added to the list, and 4% of the population had aging as they thinking that was a big worry in the population. 4%. It's risen up to about 12%. It has gone up. Back in 2011, also sitting at 4% was the environment, and the environment has gone off the scale. Both of these are long-term challenges facing the UK and society and the economy. What can we learn from Greta Thunberg and our advocate to try and catch up with them? They're somehow cutting across more on the subject of aging, on the subject of the environment, than we are on the subject of aging.
Sarah, do you have any perspectives on the sectoral question?
I do, because obviously we started with a lot of workers doing what's termed as a lot of unskilled work, whether that's cleaning or general housekeeping, dog walking, whatever. And I personally think it's about language and changing our language from unskilled work. Actually, it's really needed in a lot of situations. We've had some of our cleaners who are still needed to go into people's houses during COVID-19 to clean because the vulnerable adults who need their house to be in a certain way. But also if you look after someone's child and you help, as a lot of our treasures do, who do a bit of childcare, and you help a working mum manage her day, that kind of relatively unskilled job of picking a child up from school, giving them a bit of tea and helping them with their homework is hugely valued. So I think it's the way that we talk about it internally, and we can, because we're a small organisation, we talk about it in terms of, we champion workers. It's about experience. It's about, the skills match. And we always feed back great reviews to our treasures from customers, and to make them feel really valued, whatever the job is. And it's really interesting. On one hand, we get probably the service that we get most complaints about is about cleaning, and it's just a natural thing. But also the service that we get most thanks for is cleaning. So someone comes home and their house is clean, and it just is, and it can be really valued. So from my point of view, it's about respecting any type of work that's done. And I think, going back to Yvonne's point, the coronavirus issue of kind of traditionally unskilled services or unskilled workers are now so important to our daily lives. It would be interesting to see if there could be a change of language there as well.
Very interesting. Well, we are about to run out of time, and I did say that I was going to come back to the social friction question. We've had a lot of questions put in by our participants, and so to all those watching, apologies if we haven't directly made it to your point. There are some really interesting ones around, for example, the challenged in communicating properly around what people need to do to save for retirement. This question on age differences, the different age groups that are going to be affected by the pandemic in the sort of workplace world. It sounds like older workers and younger workers are going to be the ones with at most disadvantage. And so just for overall final thoughts from all of the panelists, potentially sort of embedded in the context I'm about to say. I wonder if some of the responses we've seen to handling the coronavirus pandemic, and in a sense to try to make sure that we don't suffer terribly socially and by extension economically through the lockdown. We've obviously seen the important role that the state has to play. And I think in one respect, everyone has highlighted the fact that there's a lack of a proper safety net. This, for me, comes back to questions around whether or not the future of work and the future of the post-pandemic world is one in which we see or ought to see a stronger welfare state in the United Kingdom, one that allows people to have the security they need to embark on something new, to shift between one situation or another, and whether or not businesses can continue to play the important role they play in providing labor opportunities alongside a world where people don't have to worry too terribly about, for example, losing their job. That's a bit of my provocation. But first I'll turn it over to you, Alistair, for any kind of response and final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I think, did you ask me whether we needed a larger welfare state?
I'm thinking better.
Better. I think I'll agree with better or / new. I think the welfare state that we celebrate today was born out of the Second World War. The beverage reforms have been phenomenal. There's a big opportunity to have beverage too. It requires political strength and confidence. And if anything can come out of the coronavirus pandemic, it should be a willingness to think the unthinkable. And there are some, without going into the details, there are some great new initiatives we could bring towards the welfare state. So I would certainly be open to a new / better welfare state in the wake of coronavirus.
And Sarah?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I also think it's up to organisations to work hard at attracting talent, retaining talent, finding different ways. We're going to have to work really hard in the future to get loads of people to come on board of local treasures, because there'll be other organisations like us providing incredibly flexible work opportunities. So we have to make sure that we provide that kind of that backup for a situation. And there's a lot of damning of gig economy workers and those kind of businesses that provide that, often quite rightly. But what they do provide is what a lot of workers want, which is flexibility. So we can't say too bluntly that on one hand that is bad and working with full benefits is good. There has to be another way, and absolutely the state can work on it, but businesses can too, and businesses, particularly small businesses like mine, can be quicker and more agile at doing that.
Great. And finally, Yvonne.
Final thoughts from me. 3 things I think a better welfare state could provide would be a national care service, national care system. Secondly, enablement of phased retirement. So early retirement whilst continuing working, provide as much flexibility around that, either from pension plan design perspective or state pension design. Why can't we draw our state pension slightly early, take a lower amount, etc.? And then thirdly, some social protections for income volatility for self-employed, I think, are fundamental. More and more of us will be taking self-employed roles as we go forward, and at the moment there is no security for those.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you for a very stimulating, very engaging conversation. I want to just highlight for participants that the ILC Partners Program is a way that you can work with us. And if you have any, if you want to find out more about it, please contact my colleague Redvers, whose email is there at the bottom of the screen. There are many ways that the Partners Program can help you understand longevity a bit better and be engaged in some very fruitful debates like we've seen today. Final plug, also, we will be having our Future of Aging 2020 conference this year on the 3rd of December. We're hoping it's going to be in person and the live event, albeit socially distanced probably, but you can of course keep an eye on updates by joining our newsletter, where in finding more information on our website. So just a final thank you to all of our panelists today, and do feel free to get in touch with any of us for future information and to find out more about our future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.